Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Ejiogu. Now, citizens of 15 African countries will have to post bonds of up to $15,000 to visit the US, according to a new temporary travel rule which comes into effect on the 24th of December. According to the US State Department, the 6-month pilot program, which targets those on both visitor and business visas, will act as a deterrent to people who overstay their visas. Outgoing President Donald Trump, who lost a re-election bid earlier this month, made restricting immigration a central part of his 4-year term in office. President-elect Joe Biden has pledged to reverse many of Mr. Trump's immigration policies, but untangling hundreds of changes could take months or even years.
I'm going to send to the United States Congress a pathway to citizenship for over 11 million undocumented people. And all of those so-called dreamers, those DACA kids, they're going to be immediately certified again to be able to stay in this country and put on a path to citizenship. The idea that they are being sent home by this guy, and they want to do that, is they've gone to a country they've never seen before. I can imagine you're 5 years old, your parents are taking you across the Rio Grande River, and it's illegal. And you say, oh no, Mom, leave me here. I'm not going to go with you. They've been here. Many of them are model citizens. Over 20,000 of them are first responders out there taking care of people during this crisis. We owe them. We owe them.
That's Joe Biden during the debate there between himself and Donald Trump, talking about the broader issue of immigration generally, and not, of course, on the specific point. But to get to that specific point, I'm joined now via WebEx by the attorney at law and U.S. immigration law expert, Nedum Ejiogu, who's a member of the New Jersey Bar and the Federal District Court of New Jersey. And his law firm in the U.S. state of Maryland is Ejiogu and Associates, LLC. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Ejiogu. So what's behind this move by the Trump administration? I understand that Mr. Trump's position is that these are the countries where over 10% of people who came to the US from there in 2019 overstayed their visas.
Thank you for having me, Charles. It's still morning here, and it's afternoon in Abuja. So good afternoon. The problem I have with the policy is not the power of the president to enact the policy, but the rationality of it and the fairness of it. And the policy lacks both. The Trump vision of immigration is starkly different from Joe Biden's. Joe Biden believes in diversity and believes in immigration as a veritable tool for economic vitality and improving the socio-cultural fabric of the United States. With respect to this policy, I think it's discriminatory in intent and purpose, and discriminatory in impact and effect, in the sense that there are no real national security threats that the people who are suffering this obnoxious policy, as far as I'm concerned, they don't pose any security threat or national security concerns. And also, there are other countries who have more overstays are not affected. Granted, they said it's 10% of overstays, but in real terms, the number of people that have overstays in these African countries are not more than those that have them in European countries. So I think it's disproportionately applied.
Well, that's a very good point you make there. So if the numbers are just in the hundreds and are clearly so few, I mean, I was looking at Burkina Faso, for instance, which is on that list. I understand there were around 433 people who overstayed. If the numbers are so few, why particularly have these countries been singled out?
Well, the only explanation I have is what I see, and I think is discriminatory in purpose and intent. I don't see why they should be singled out. As you know, the African countries in general and the sub-Saharan Africa in general have been unfairly treated. They have even been subjected to verbal denigration. If you recall, they were insulted really by being called S-hold countries. Then the travel ban also unfairly targets countries from this region. So there is no other way of explaining it than just wanting the quota of African countries' immigration into the United States to be drastically reduced.
Well, I mean, in order to try and balance this, which we always do as journalists, I mean, I've read that President Trump issued a directive requiring the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security to come up with ideas on how to deter people from overstaying their visas. So I suppose the administration's response is to target those countries whose citizens have 10% overstay rate, irrespective of where those countries are.
Yeah, I understand. Every nation, indeed, has a responsibility to control illegal or irregular immigration. So it's their prerogative under the Article 2 of the United States Constitution. The powers given to the president to regulate foreign relations and immigration is almost plenary. But these laws have to be applied in a fair and humanitarian manner, because we don't reside in an isolationist world. I think the policy that we have seen so far has not been fair enough, has not been humane enough. So I understand the prerogative of the United States government to regulate its immigration, but there are fairer ways of doing it. For example, with overstays, there are laws that are already in place in the United States, in immigration law. If you overstay up to 6 months, you're subject to a 3-year ban. If you overstay up to 1 year, you're subject to a 10-year ban. And under the Trump administration, anyway, when people overstay, they are subject to aggressive enforcement and is sometimes placed on deportation proceedings. So I think those checks are already enough. What we are seeing now is an overkill. I mean, $15,000 bond for poor African countries. And by the way, it's I must note that African countries, immigrants from Africa contribute a lot to the US economy in terms of education. They are more educated than their counterparts in most regions of the world. So they are really assets to the US economy.
That's a good point, and I want to take you up on a point you made earlier, because I mean, one's got to look at the other side of the coin, just as we tried to see the justification for this new directive from President Trump. Because if we look at the list of countries, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that actually have large numbers of people who are overstaying, then the UK, for instance, catches one's eye with 16,234 people in 2014 alone. Spain had 14,784 people who overstayed their visas. I mean, granted, those are smaller percentages of their citizens who are overstaying, but in terms of the effect, it would have a much more significant effect, wouldn't it, if the US were to target Western European citizens. But of course, the fallout from doing that would be enormous in comparison to targeting Burkina Faso, which only has 433 people who overstayed.
Precisely. The European countries in general are beneficiaries of the immigration policies. As you know, there's a program called the Visa Waiver Program that allows the citizens of some European countries to come into the United States without formally going to the embassies, and they're allowed to stay 45 days and go back. And they have overstays, and no one does much about it. I must confess that most of them also do return also, but things are made easier for them than these African countries.
You said, Mr. Ejiogu, we know that President Trump has said some pretty unflattering things in his tenure as president about African countries. I mean, do you think any of that is feeding into this? Is it impossible to divorce the president's vitriolic statements against Africans, and indeed African Americans and people who are coming to the US from war-torn countries, from his administration's policies such as this one?
I think it's difficult to divorce that. As you know, we hear about actions speaking louder than voice. But for the US president, I think the voice speaks louder. When the US president speaks and sneezes, the world catches a cold. You cannot divorce the rhetoric from the actual intent. It's been a pattern, really. There has been a conscious policy of reducing quotas on the immigration benefits for African countries. As you know, the visa lottery program, the diversity lottery program, there has been a major pushback on it with an effort to end it. Then the refugee program, even though we speak more about the South American countries, but the refugee program also benefits African countries and is being rolled back. The H-1B program for specialty occupation professionals has been rolled back and also disproportionately affects African countries. So most of the immigration benefits are on a quota basis, and the quota for African countries have been drastically reduced. So to answer your question, you cannot divorce the rhetoric from the actual intent, the actual impact and effect.
Well, please stay with us, Mr. Ejiogu, because we want to talk with you a little bit more. I mean, you're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the new travel rule imposed on 15 African countries by the US President Donald Trump as he prepares to leave office. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Eniegolu. Citizens of 15 African countries will have to post bonds of up to $15,000 to visit the United States. That's according to a new travel rule imposed by US President Donald Trump as he leaves his position. Details of the new rule were released this week, and it will come into effect on December the 24th. It targets countries whose nationals had an overstay rate of 10% or higher in 2019, and those nationals will now be required to pay a refundable bond of up to $15,000. But correspondents say that while those nations had higher rates of overstays, they sent relatively few travelers to the US. The African countries affected are Angola, Burkina Faso, Chad, Democratic Republic of Congo, Djibouti, Eritrea, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Libya, Mauritania, Sudan, Sao Tome and Principe, Cape Verde and Burundi. And with me via WebEx, the attorney at law and U.S. immigration law expert, Nedum Ejiogu, who is a member of the New Jersey Bar and the Federal District Court of New Jersey, and whose law firm in the U.S. state of Maryland is Ejiogu and Associates, LLC. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. We have, of course, seen from time to time during the Trump administration travel bans, but even though this move is not explicitly a travel ban per se, but it will certainly have that effect, won't it? I mean, for a number of the individuals who are coming from those African countries, and as you mentioned earlier, simply cannot round up $10,000 or $15,000.
Yeah, that's correct, Charles. I mean, rounding up $5,000, especially with the very high exchange rate, it's a problem. Not to think about rounding up $15,000. Again, it's quite an unfair policy because this ban is disproportionately applied to countries where the citizens are unlikely to afford that amount of money. It's not, it's definitely not a fair policy, not a humanitarian policy, and certainly not justified.
I mean, US policymakers who are involved in this would say that that's the point. I mean, you know, we need to deter people from overstaying their legal visas. I mean, can you, you know, stay, I mean, you telling the people you can stay for the visa, but once it's up, you have to go. I mean, what do you say to that as an African immigration lawyer in the US? Are you saying that's the right policy, but you are targeting the wrong people?
Well, American laws and America's public policy and jurisprudence is anchored on equal protection of laws. When you identify a certain group of people and treat them differently from others, then it's patently unfair. Like I said, a nation has a responsibility to ensure that its immigration is legal and not abused. And I had already indicated that there are safeguards that are already in place for visa overstays. But I think this policy is a bit too aggressive and disproportionate. And, you know, I've come across studies that have suggested that the way and manner of checking overstays in and of itself is faulty. For example, you have people coming in with the B1, B2 tourist visas, but they change their status either to permanent residents or other non-immigrant visas. And some of these studies have indicated that some of those people are not captured. And there are some people that leave the shores of the US on land and other means, and all that is not captured also. So the numbers that are determined by the Department of Homeland Security are not even certain. So I really think the bond policy is an overkill.
So, what is your feeling about how President-elect Joe Biden will approach this? I mean, is it something he will tackle? Is it something he will reverse? Can he reverse it? Or is it your suspicion that this is not going to rise to the top of the Biden administration's priorities in the first few months? And given that it's a temporary order, it's likely to expire on its own terms.
Yes, expiring on its own terms is one consideration. 6 months is not a very long time, but again, it is in a way because it's going to impact a lot of people negatively. But President Biden has, in his own words, reflected on his website and what he has said in the campaign. He has explicitly indicated that he's going to make sweeping changes in immigration law. Immigration, he believes, is essential to the socio-economic fabric of the US society. And also the cultural vibrancy and intellectual vibrancy of the society in the US. So he has a very positive attitude towards the US. Specifically, he has stated what he is going to reverse. The travel ban, he again finds discriminatory, and he has clearly stated that he's going to reverse the travel ban. The treatment of refugees where children are crudely and unfairly separated from their parents, that would change. The Dreamers, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, policy is going to be reinstated. The H-1B visa policy is going to be reinstated and even encouraged because of the effect it has on the US labor force. You know, two things. Legal immigration was reduced by 49% by the Trump administration. That's unprecedented. And it's also good to keep in mind that the foreign labor force contributes $2 trillion to the US economy, according to the studies by the Hamilton Project. So President Biden is very mindful of the importance of immigration. He sees it as a strength, he sees it as an asset, and he sees it as an avenue to bridge the technology, science, and innovation gaps in the US economy. So he's very positive about immigration. So, and I believe that most of these changes that are anti-immigration are going to be made.
Okay, Nedum Ejiogu, I want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us and to explain these issues to us. Of course, with Joe Biden, I'm assuming that a lot of these things that you're talking about him reversing can be done through executive orders rather than through the Senate or Congress, because he might have a bit of a challenge there if the Democratic Party does not win a majority or secure a majority in the Senate. But thank you very much indeed. Nedum Ejiogu is an attorney at law, U.S. immigration law expert, who's a member of the New Jersey Bar and the Federal District Court of New Jersey. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and the United States, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.